What's the darkest secret you found out about a family member? Story 1. Not exactly a secret, but definitely something weird. In the late 1960s, my maternal grandmother's husband divorced her and gave her partial custody of their 2 boys. During one of the visits, she took off with the kids and moved them from North Dakota to California. Her entire family was Seventh-day Adventist, which is a tight-knit community. So when she moved to California, she found an area with a strong Seventh-day Adventist presence, knowing that the community would protect her from the authorities. It's important to note that her ex-husband had not been accused of any abuse. She was just angry that she didn't get full custody. This situation lasted from about 1968 to 1971. Eventually, she had a falling out with either her adopted mother or her cousin, and they contacted her ex-husband, who came and took the kids. My grandmother did not receive jail time for the kidnapping, but was not allowed to see the boys again. As far as I know, she hasn't seen either of them since 1971. Later on, the Seventh-day Adventist Church paired her with another parishioner, who became my grandfather. Neither my mom nor my aunts have ever met their half-brothers. Edit. This wasn't exactly a family secret, just something that wasn't talked about much. In fact, she kept talking about them obsessively right into her old age. According to my mom, she had a framed picture of the boys walking away from her. The story behind the picture is that they didn't like living with her, and when their dad came for them, they walked away without looking back, not even for the photo. Story 2. My dad's friend committed suicide by shooting himself in the head in front of my dad and some other friends when he was just 15 years old. They were all hanging out at the friend's house, having a good time, when the friend went upstairs, grabbed his father's pistol, and came back down, calling for everyone's attention. Then he put the gun to his head, squeezed the trigger, and collapsed behind a couch. At first, they thought it was some kind of sick joke until they looked over the couch and saw his body in the blood. I first heard this story from my mom when I was 18, which explains some of my dad's behavior toward toy guns when I was a kid. I never brought it up to him, just hoping that one day he would open up to me about it. Eventually he did, but we haven't talked about it since. It's incredible how my dad turned out to be such a great man after experiencing something so traumatic at such a young age. However, according to him, it's something that never really left him. He still has nightmares about it and gets really uneasy when movies or TV shows depict someone getting shot in the head. Story 3. I'm not sure if this would be considered a family secret since my mom grew up in a small town where everyone probably knew about it, but here it goes. I've mentioned before that my great-grandma died when my grandma was 4, and her father remarried a woman who already had kids of her own. My step-great-grandma used to beat my grandma and her siblings horribly as soon as their father left the house. She would lock them in the basement all day and treat them terribly. Naturally, this had a huge negative impact on them, and my grandma eventually treated her own kids the same way. One of my great-uncles became an alcoholic. He also started robbing graves. Apparently, he had a bizarre obsession with gold teeth, but he would also steal jewelry and anything else valuable to buy booze. Mom recalls him showing up at the back door when she was a kid, covered in dirt. Her mom would always take him in for a while, feeding and clothing him before he'd go right back to drinking and grave robbing. My mom always told me he died in an accident. However, a few years ago, one of my uncles revealed that he actually died when someone found him passed out on a front lawn. The police were called, and when they tried to arrest him, he woke up and resisted. In the ensuing struggle, the cops killed him. Story 4. My brother and I were just kids, 7 and 3 years old, when it happened. We were taking a bath with our mom when we heard a massive bang coming from the living room where my dad was watching TV. We both started crying immediately, and my mom rushed out to see what had happened. She came back quickly, tears streaming down her face, and told us not to worry. She said, "Everything is fine. Your dad accidentally fired his gun because he thought there was a burglar." Being so young and naive, we believed her without question. When we got out of the bath, we went to see my dad, who was still alive and sitting there. He gave us a big, unexpected hug and reassured us that he had just thought someone was breaking in. He even showed us the bullet hole in the sofa, the chip in the floor tile where the bullet hit, and the squashed bullet itself. It wasn't until much later that I remembered this incident and realized what had actually happened. My dad had planned to shoot himself on the sofa that day, but must have pulled the gun away from his head at the last second, firing into the sofa instead. My mom, understanding what he had tried to do, came up with a quick story to keep us calm. Looking back, it also explains the huge hug my dad gave us afterward, like he was grateful to still be there. He's never tried anything like that again and is still alive and doing well at 65. Story 5. Long story short, my great-grandmother's first husband, who fathered 5 of her children, just couldn't be convinced to stop seeing another woman in town. Eventually, this other woman became pregnant, and her family wanted my great-grandmother's husband to take responsibility for the child. The solution they came up with was that my great-grandmother's husband would leave her, marry the other woman, and in return, the other woman's family would give my great-grandmother a huge plot of land called the Hill. My great-grandmother eventually remarried and had 4 more kids, including my grandmother. Fast forward 90 years and the situation with the Hill became complicated. All the siblings had grown up, started families, and passed away, leaving no clear indication of who actually owned the land. Eventually, a drilling company discovered a massive natural gas deposit under the Hill. They had all the great-grandchildren sign over the mineral rights in exchange for regular checks. Now, every so often, the whole family gets an update on how much gas has been extracted, and checks are sent out to all the surviving great-grandkids. Story 6. My dad tried to kill me when I was 3. My little brother has always been sickly. He had trouble breathing and sometimes needed to go to the hospital because of it. I don't know exactly what condition he had. One day, my mom told my dad that my brother was sick again and needed medicine. My dad didn't want to give her money but said he'd go buy it himself. My mom started getting us kids ready to go to the pharmacy, but my dad insisted that we stay home and let my 4-year-old sister watch us. My mom refused and got us into the car. As we were driving, my dad started ramming our car with his, trying to push us off the road into a ditch. The ditch was deep enough that flipping the car would likely kill us all. My older sister screamed out the window, and a random guy driving by leaned out and started yelling at my dad, threatening to call the cops and saying he'd break my dad's legs if the cops didn't handle it. My dad eventually drove away, and my mom pulled over, sobbing, and called my grandma. Grandma called my dad and told him that if he ever tried something like that again, she would kill him herself and feed him to her hogs. I didn't hear about this story until my 23rd birthday, when my grandma decided to tell me after I was upset about my boyfriend breaking up with me. Quite the birthday present, huh? Story 7. Mine isn't as dark as some others, but here it goes. My father was killed when I was young, and my mother couldn't really handle raising me, so I ended up living abroad with my father's sister, FS. Fast forward 11 years, and my mom passed away from cancer. During those 11 years, we stayed in touch, visited often, and even grew pretty close at some points. In the final stages of her cancer, my mom was barely functional, sometimes talking about random things like pine cones in Finland. That's when my mom's sister, MS, started talking to me about inheritance and financial stuff. I knew my mom wasn't going to make it, but discussing inheritance while she was still alive just felt wrong to me. FS warned me to be careful around MS, hinting that something had happened years ago that caused a huge rift between my parents, but she wouldn't tell me what it was. She didn't want to change the way I saw my parents. After my mom died, MS kept insisting that we not talk about money or anything related to it, and urged me to wait before filing for my inheritance. Turns out she had already filed for inheritance on behalf of my grandfather, who was my mom's next of kin, making him eligible like me. At the time, my grandfather was dying of dementia, and since MS was his next of kin, his share of the inheritance would go to her once he passed. He died just a few weeks after I found out about her filing. Every time MS contacted me after that, it was always to ask for information that would help her claim a portion of my parents' inheritance. I had to get a lawyer involved since I was living in another country and couldn't be there in person. The whole situation just made me realize how money can corrupt anyone. I finally asked FS about the secret because I needed to know who I was dealing with. That's when she told me the truth. MS and my dad had gotten drunk one day and slept together while my mom and I were home. They even had an affair for a while. I can't entirely blame MS because it takes two to have an affair, but it definitely changed how I see her, especially after everything else that's happened. Story 8. There are a few stories I can remember, so here's one. Back in the 1950s or 60s, there was a family member, I think it was my grandmother's cousin, who was in his 20s at the time. One day he took his dad's car out for a drive and ended up crashing it, dying instantly on impact. The tragic part is that he didn't know his dad had been working on the car and had disconnected the brakes. Then there's my own story. When I was about 5, my mother kidnapped me from my father. She and her friends abused and neglected me pretty badly. When I was 7, my dad won full custody. At first, he was a good father, but as I got older, he became more and more verbally abusive. It wasn't until I was a teenager that I found out my mom had another child with a different man before she met my dad. She abused that child too, forcing him to eat dog food from pet bowls on the floor. He was eventually taken away from her. I also learned that my dad hadn't really wanted to be a parent in the first place. My mom had intentionally stopped using birth control because she wanted a reason not to work anymore. My dad would come home after a long day and find that my mom hadn't fed me, changed me, or cleaned up. Despite being a stay-at-home mom, it made sense why he often blamed me for everything and said he wished I'd never been born. He resented me for the life he didn't want. The abuse I went through became a big family secret. Anytime I tried to talk about it, they would silence me, not wanting the burden to tarnish the family name. I've cut off contact with all of them now. Story 9. I recently came to the realization that my father might have more children than just me and my siblings. My parents got divorced when I was around 9, and it didn't come as a big shock since they never really liked each other. My dad was always a bit sneaky, staying out late, having random numbers saved on his phone. After the divorce, he kept our birth certificates, saying his place was more secure than my mom's house. When I turned 14, I wanted to get my nose pierced, so we needed a copy of my birth certificate. We went to my dad's place to get it, and while he was looking through the files, I noticed multiple names listed under his name. They weren't any names I recognized. When he saw me noticing, he started shuffling through the papers faster and eventually found mine. I didn't ask him about it at the time, but it stuck with me. I distinctly remember seeing names like Marissa and John. I can't help but wonder if I might have more siblings out there. I plan on getting a DNA test one day to find out for sure. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but seeing those names made me question everything. Story 10. It all started when my uncle, who had been diagnosed with stage 4 lymphoma, pleaded with me to take him out of his hospital bed. He wanted to go home. He was desperate. I loved him dearly, but 3 weeks later, he passed away without saying another word to me or anyone else. After he died, my mom and I were clearing out his room when she found a lockbox. It had a note on it that instructed whoever found it to throw it away. My mom, curious despite the warning, decided to open it. Inside, she discovered his secret. My uncle was gay. The box contained gay travel books and photos of him alone at various places he had visited across the country. It's one of the saddest things I've ever experienced. My uncle had lived his whole life as a bachelor, hiding one of the truest parts of himself. To think he felt the need to lock away his identity in a tiny box breaks my heart. I can't forget the frantic look in his eyes when he begged me to take him out of the hospital. I think he wanted to get rid of that box, the shame he had been living with for so long. It's just so incredibly sad. My heart goes out to everyone in the LGBTQ+ community. No one should ever have to hide who they truly are. Story 11. My dad had a mistress and a daughter with her. She was born about 3 years after I was. That alone might not sound too strange, but the way I found out makes it a whole different story. Growing up, my home life wasn't great, and as soon as I turned 18, I left without looking back, especially when it came to my dad. I joined the military, got my life together, and didn't keep in touch. My dad passed away while I was in the service, but I didn't go to the funeral. After I got out, I enrolled at a university in my home state. While studying physics, I met a girl named Mary in my study group. We hit it off right away. We had so much in common, and we were both somewhat estranged from our families. We dated for almost 2 years, lived together, had a lot of great times, and even talked about getting married. Eventually, though, we broke up and went our separate ways. Years later, I tried to reconnect with my mom a few times, but she was always bitter and toxic. After her stroke, her mind was gone. She would mistake me for her boyfriend and think she was back in high school. I couldn't really talk to her anymore. Fast forward to recently when I took a 23andMe DNA test. The results showed that I had a half-sister. We shared the same father. When I looked at her profile picture, I froze. It was Mary. She must have gotten the notification too because she reached out through the site. When we talked on the phone, she explained that she never knew who her dad was, only that he sent her mom money occasionally. I told her she hadn't missed much. We both agreed that we should never talk to our families about our past relationship. If anyone asked, we'd just say we were friends from college. I'm not on social media, so that helps keep things quiet. We've only talked a few times since then, but I'm honestly not sure what to do next, if anything. It's just one of those things that makes you question everything you thought you knew. Story 12. I've recently discovered some unsettling things about my grandparents on my mother's side. I'm about 90% sure that they might have killed and eaten people. Back in the 1950s, my grandparents decided to elope and ran away into the jungle. They built their own house, almost Robinson Crusoe style. My mom was born in that house, delivered by my grandfather. As you can imagine, they are incredibly tough, resilient, and self-reliant people. I've heard stories about a group of bandits who were terrorizing nearby villages at the time. Apparently, they may have stumbled across my grandparents' house and even kidnapped my mom when she was an infant. My mom doesn't remember it, and my grandparents have only hinted at it. Supposedly, my grandparents hunted down the bandits, killed most, if not all of them, and then, well, they might have salvaged their meat since finding food in the jungle can be difficult. When I visited my grandparents as a kid, they would always warn me never to go near a particular mound near their house. Even now when I ask about it, they just say, "You can dig it up and see for yourself after we die." I have a feeling I'd find the bones of the people they killed and possibly ate. There's more to this story. I was born in the same country as my father, but when I was about 4, my parents left in a hurry to go to my mom's country of birth, taking nothing with them. My father cut off contact with his side of the family completely and never talks about it. Based on hints from my mom and grandparents, I think my father might have told his family about what my grandparents did, and they told him to leave my mom and me. He refused and ended up essentially being banished. Of course, all of this is just speculation. Maybe they're just messing with me. But even now at 33, they refuse to tell me the full story. Story 13. A long time ago, I found out that mental illness runs in my family. Specifically the kind that causes hallucinations, paranoia, forgetfulness, and violent behavior. My aunt has it pretty bad. More recently, I learned that my grandmother used to keep her locked in her room every day, treating her terribly, basically making her the house slave. Whenever my aunt managed to get out, she would go do drugs, drink, or get pregnant. This all happened when she was between 14 and 17. Eventually, she was diagnosed and placed in an asylum from the 60s until the mid-70s. After she was released, properly medicated, she was put on disability and has been monitored ever since. But my mom later found out that during her time in the asylum, my aunt had been raped multiple times by staff members. She couldn't coherently defend herself or tell anyone because of her mental state. Since then, my aunt has been living in a kind of halfway house for people with similar conditions and is under the guardianship of my mom and another aunt. It's heartbreaking to know how she was treated both by our family and by the people who were supposed to take care of her. Story 14. I recently found out that my great-grandpa killed my great-grandma. I never met him since he died before I was born, but throughout my life I heard nothing but good things about him. My mom would always say he was caring and calm. One day I learned that he used to beat my great-grandma sometimes. The most shocking part came when I found out that during a particularly drunken fight, he shot and killed her. What's even more disturbing is that no one in the family called the police or did anything about it. They just kind of hid it, and he never went to jail. I understand that this was many decades ago, and that attitudes were different back then, unfortunately in a way that often excused men beating their wives. Still, it was a shock considering how everyone in the family always spoke about him with such admiration. My mom told me that he regretted it for the rest of his life, and would constantly talk about how much he missed her. But still, it's hard to reconcile the image of this kind, gentle man they painted for me with the reality of what he actually did. Story 15. Growing up, I was always bullied for having a big family. People at school would call me a traveler all the time, but I never really understood why. I just assumed it was a typical Irish thing to have a large family. That changed in 2019 when I discovered the horrifying truth. Most of my family members are actually children of rape, and my granddad was a serial rapist. Looking back, I always felt that something was off about my family. My grandparents are wealthy, millionaires even, and they would constantly give money to their children for various reasons. Many of my relatives struggle with mental health issues, alcoholism, and other problems, and my granddad would pay for therapy, rehab, and anything else they needed. I always thought it was strange since most of them were well off enough to cover the costs themselves. It turns out that money was hush money. I am the first child out of 30 grandkids who was not raped by him. Of course, I didn't know this at the time. I just remember that every Christmas, the oldest grandchild would be given my granddad's debit card, and all the grandkids could buy whatever they wanted. I thought it was just a generous Christmas tradition, but again, it was actually hush money. In 2019, the truth finally came out. After years without any reported cases, everyone assumed the abuse was over. But then it started happening again. This time to the younger children. That was the breaking point. My family couldn't stay silent anymore, especially with the little ones in danger. They finally took action, not willing to let the cycle continue. It's been 2 years since everything was revealed. More victims have come forward, including some people we didn't even know had been affected. It's overwhelming to process, But at the same time, it's a relief to finally know the truth and begin to address the damage. Story 16. My great-grandfather liberated my great-grandmother from the Birkenau concentration camp in 1945. He took her back to Edinburgh, where they got married and had my granddad. Growing up, my granddad idolized his father. He always believed he was just a hard-working man who provided for his family by working at the docks in Leith. My granddad spent his entire youth and young adulthood looking up to his father, seeing him as a role model and a pillar of strength. That image shattered on my great-grandfather's deathbed. In his final moments, my great-granddad confessed to my granddad that he wasn't just a dock worker. He revealed that he had been a gangster for years, robbing, killing, and leading a prominent gang in Leith. It was his way of clearing his conscience before he died, but it completely destroyed my granddad's perception of him. To make matters worse, it turned out that many people already knew the truth, except for my granddad. As if that wasn't enough, my great-granddad also admitted to brutally abusing my great-grandmother throughout their entire marriage. The revelation shook the entire family to the core. It was something no one ever spoke about again, and I only learned about it a couple of years ago. The story left me stunned. To think that the man my granddad looked up to for so long was secretly a violent criminal and an abusive husband. It's heartbreaking and difficult to process. Story 17. My dad is originally from Korea, and his mother never told him who his father was. When she remarried an American soldier, they moved to the United States. My grandmother passed away last year, and shortly after, my dad received a call from his uncle back in Korea. The uncle told my dad that he needed to come back and visit the family. He said he had a picture of my dad's father and was finally ready to reveal his identity. However, he made it clear that he wouldn't do it over the phone, only in person. He also mentioned that he didn't reveal the truth earlier out of respect for my grandmother while she was alive. Growing up, my dad always felt mistreated by his mother. She constantly blamed, shamed, and guilt-tripped him throughout his life. Naturally, this new revelation sparked a lot of speculation. After discussing it with my brothers and some cousins living across the states, we began to suspect something unsettling, that my dad's father might actually be his biological grandfather. When I brought up this theory to my cousin in Philly, she went completely silent, neither confirming nor denying it. It felt like she knew I had figured it out. My dad still hasn't gone back to visit, and I think he's terrified of finding out the truth. Story 18. Growing up, I always knew I had an older sister. My mom would often talk about her fondly, and she even had a tattoo with all her children's initials, including hers. I was always told that my mom had been very young when she gave birth and couldn't provide for her, so adoption was the best option. Later on, I found out the disturbing truth. My mom was just 13 at the time, and she had been in a relationship with a 25-year-old man. She kept the pregnancy a secret until the final trimester. When my grandmother found out, she demanded that my mom get an abortion, but it was too late. So my grandmother gave her an ultimatum: either give up the baby or end up on the streets with a newborn and nowhere to go. My grandmother then went to my sister's father, threatening him with prison if he didn't sign away his parental rights. Once that was settled, she arranged for the adoption. One of her co-workers, who was struggling to conceive, expressed interest. My grandmother convinced my mom that giving up the baby would provide her with a better life. Reluctantly, my mom agreed, under the conditions that my sister be named Elle and that there would be regular updates and possible visits. But that's not all. About a year after the adoption, my grandmother told the co-worker that my mom never wanted to hear from them again, cutting off all contact. We later found out that she didn't even pass along the chosen name, though by coincidence my sister was given the same name anyway. Ironically, my grandmother continued working with that co-worker for another decade. I finally found my sister on my 21st birthday. It turned out we had lived in the same town for years, shared many mutual friends, and had even run into each other once without realizing it. Unfortunately, her life had been rough, and my mom couldn't accept the person she had become. She refuses to spend time with her or her kids. Before my grandmother passed away, I drove her to chemo one day, and she admitted that her biggest regret was not catching on sooner and forcing my mom to go through with the abortion. It was a shocking confession and left me wondering how different things might have been if my grandmother hadn't interfered in the way she did. Story 19. On my father's 18th birthday, his parents sat him down for a talk. Without any attempt to soften the blow, they bluntly told him that he was adopted. At first, he didn't believe them, so his mother pulled out his birth certificate for the first time. To his shock, another woman's name was listed as the birth mother, and the father's name was simply marked as R.A.P.E. His parents explained that they didn't know much about his biological mother, But what they had been told was that she was a very young girl who became pregnant after being raped and had given my father up at birth. Then came a second shock. His mom, the woman who had raised him, was actually his third mother. His much older sister was the one who originally adopted him. She thought having a baby would be fun, but after a few months the novelty wore off, and she decided motherhood wasn't for her. When her parents found out she was planning to return my father to the orphanage, they were furious. They felt that giving him back would embarrass the family. So instead of allowing her to return him to the state, they took him in themselves. From that point on, his sister became his mother, and his biological mother became his sister. Understandably, my father was completely shocked and overwhelmed by the revelations. He remembered just sitting there, frozen and speechless. Then, as if the news wasn't enough, his parents told him that now that he was 18, he should probably move out. Story 20. My story might not seem as intense as some others, but it's still something that deeply affected me. I recently found out that my entire immediate family was in on a plot devised by my mother to have me institutionalized, essentially put away in a mental institution forever. The way I found out was almost surreal. One of them accidentally copied me on an email thread that outlined their detailed plan. The whole thing was meticulously documented, revealing how they intended to present me as mentally unfit. To give some context, I do have epilepsy, but it's well controlled. Even for those who can't manage their epilepsy, there's absolutely no reason to institutionalize someone or take away their basic rights. I also have a son, and it became clear that my mother's ultimate goal was to remove him from my care. After discovering their plan, I thought about getting temporary restraining orders, TROS, against them. But how do you do that against your whole family? Instead, I opted for a long, stern conversation with them, confronting them about what they had planned. A few months later, a police officer knocked on my door. He said they had received a report of improper care of my son. I invited him in, and it was obvious to him that everything was fine. Although he couldn't officially say who the reporting party was, I guessed it was my mother. I explained that she lives far away and sometimes experiences forgetfulness and control issues, often in bizarre and harmful ways. Eventually, the officer confirmed that it was indeed her who made the report, and I haven't had any more problems since. That was years ago, and thankfully, things have been quiet since then. I don't know how far their plans would have gone, but it's terrifying to think how easily someone could try to manipulate a situation to make you seem unfit, especially when it's your own family. Story 21. My story is actually about my own name. I'm named after my father, which has always been confusing for things like insurance, loans, and bank documents since we constantly got mixed up. I was born extremely premature at 24 weeks back in 1987. When I was delivered, the doctor told my mom I had less than a 10% chance of survival. He coldly explained, either we bury the child with the father's name or without a name. We need to save room in the NICU for babies that have a chance to live. Back then, they didn't have the advanced technology that exists today. Not even baby ventilators that wouldn't damage my tiny lungs. The doctors had to manually modify machines to keep me alive, and those efforts actually helped pave the way for some of the neonatal technology they have now. My mom couldn't stand that doctor. As soon as I was stable enough, she had me transferred to another hospital because she couldn't bear looking at him during rounds. I ended up staying in the NICU for around 6 to 7 months. The nurses who took care of me during that time gave me a nickname, and I've used that name for most of my life. The nickname is so different from my legal name that I always had to explain it to teachers and new acquaintances. My real name and nickname don't even start with the same letter or sound, which made it even more confusing. I didn't learn the full story about my legal name until I was 17. My parents never told me before because of how dark it was. I knew parts of the story because I had appeared in newspapers and magazines at the time, which made for great show and tell at school, but I never knew why I was given my dad's name. There's a kind of poetic ending to the story. My twins were born at 29 weeks in 2017, and during their stay in the NICU, one of the nurses who had helped me survive was still working there and took care of my boys. She and my mom recognized each other and shared photos and stories. It was pretty surreal and heartwarming to see how life came full circle like that. Story 22. I'll share a story that's a bit more innocent compared to some of the others. Both of my great-grandfathers lived to be quite old, and as a kid, I would occasionally spend Sundays with them and my grandfather. I didn't speak Finnish very well, so my grandfather often had to translate for me. Sometimes they would give me a little brandy and let me smoke with them. During these gatherings, they would often share war stories, mostly from their time fighting during World War II. My grandfather would usually filter out some of the more graphic details, but sometimes the stories came out raw and unfiltered. They spoke about the things they did during the war, how they would cut off hands, cut out tongues, and, in the worst cases, decapitate enemies and put their heads on fence posts. They harbored a deep hatred for Russians, even more so than for Nazis. The sheer rage in my great-grandfather's eyes when he recounted those memories was chilling. One story that particularly stuck with me was when my great-grandfather described how he cut up a man's face but let him live because he wanted the man to carry the shame for the rest of his life. He spoke about it like it was a mark of honor, a way to ensure his enemy would never forget. They also talked about Helsinki and how, if the odds had been 1 to 10, they would have fought to the death. To them, a single Finnish man was worth 15 Russians, but the numbers never quite added up that way during the war. Hearing those stories as a kid was surreal, both fascinating and horrifying. Despite their brutal tales, I couldn't help but see them as great men, even if their experiences had clearly left deep scars. Story 23. My mom was almost incarcerated for the supposed murder of her own mother. It all started when my grandmother became really sick. None of my mom's siblings or other family members wanted to take care of her, so my mom stepped up and took on the responsibility. She cared for my grandmother for about a year or two before she eventually passed away. However, according to her doctor's records, my grandmother's death came sooner than expected. My mom didn't know how to handle the situation and ended up just sitting next to my grandmother's body for 3 days, not moving or telling anyone. The situation only came to light when the police were sent to check on her because my mom hadn't shown up for work, and my godmother got worried. When the cops arrived, they found my mom still by her mother's corpse. They took her into custody, and for a while it looked like she might actually face charges. My aunt and uncle were convinced that my mom had killed my grandmother, and they wanted her to rot in jail. The only person who tried to help her was my godmother, who never doubted her. In the end, my mom wasn't charged with anything, but the whole ordeal left a deep scar on her. The accusations from her own family, the trauma of losing her mother, and the horror of being treated like a criminal haunted her for a long time. Ironically, that tragic experience led her to become a hospice nurse. She now dedicates her life to helping people in their final days, providing the care and comfort that she struggled to offer her own mother. It's like she's trying to make peace with that past by being there for others in similar situations. It's something that still weighs heavily on her, even after all these years. Story 24. I met my grandpa for the first time last year, and he didn't hold back on sharing his past. He spilled everything, and honestly, it was way more intense than I expected. He told me that before he met my grandmother, he dropped out of school in the 6th grade. For some reason, he forgot how to read after that and ended up working for landscapers and doing labor jobs until he turned 18. When he tried to join the army, he was rejected, and that really crushed him. Out of frustration, he decided to leave and ran off to New York City. To make money, he played guitar on the streets. One night, he went to a strip club, got drunk with some locals, and ended up in a bar fight. Things escalated when one guy pulled a gun and threatened him. When the guy turned around, my grandpa reacted by hitting him over the head with a beer bottle. Grandpa doesn't remember much after that because he blacked out. When he finally woke up, he was in a hospital bed, coming out of a coma that lasted 3 weeks. The local police greeted him, informing him that the man he hit with the beer bottle had died. My grandpa was charged with murder and sentenced to life in prison. However, after spending 3 months in jail, the case was reopened, and further investigation revealed new evidence. They ultimately concluded that my grandpa hadn't committed murder, and he was released. Despite all that chaos in his youth, one of the most surprising things he told me was that he didn't learn to read until he was around 70 years old. Hearing all this from him was surreal, and it made me see him in a completely different light. He's been through a lot, and it's hard to believe that this quiet, elderly man had such a wild and tumultuous past. Story 25. My grandfather on my mom's side was not a good person. My mom shared her story with me about him, and it left a lasting impact on how I see him. When my mom was little, my grandfather pretended to be her uncle until she was about 5 years old, when her mom finally told her the truth. They lived in a big house because my grandfather had won a significant amount of money. He used that money to send some of his sons from relationships with other women to study abroad. However, my mom wasn't as fortunate. Because she was white and a woman, he refused to give her the same opportunities. My mom resembles her dad, who is Hispanic, and this discrimination deeply affected her. Despite living in a large house, my mom and her mother were confined to a small room, even as she grew older. Some of her uncles and aunts resented her simply because she was the daughter of another woman. To make matters worse, although she was the official daughter because her mother had married my grandfather, many of her siblings still treated her as if she didn't belong. To escape the constant bullying and mistreatment, my mom married my dad, who was a soldier at the time, to have someone on her side who could protect her. As the years went by, my grandfather never redeemed himself or showed remorse until his final days. Surprisingly, he left most of his properties to my mom and some to his other sons, probably as an attempt to make amends. Even after all he put her through, my mom forgave him in the end because she was the only one who took care of him when he was old and frail. The other heirs wanted nothing to do with him. Every time I visit his grave, I can't bring myself to pray for him. I can't forgive the way he treated my mom during her childhood. No matter how much my mom has forgiven him, I just can't let go of the anger. Story 26. When my oldest brother was 19, he suddenly broke up with his girlfriend of 6 years, moved out, and cut off all contact with our mother. Eventually, he moved to the other side of the world. No one would explain why he did this. And any time I asked, they would just say, "Ask him or her about it, and maybe they'll tell you." Years later, when I got my girlfriend pregnant and we decided to keep the baby, my mom started acting really strange. She became overly hands-on and aggressively touchy, sometimes even with too much force. It got so bad that we had to distance ourselves from her during the pregnancy. When my brother found out that my girlfriend was pregnant, he reached out to me for the first time in years. His message was simple but chilling. Do not let her near your girlfriend. Later on, my mom tried to convince me to leave my pregnant girlfriend, telling me I should focus on my education. I had dropped out of college to get a job and support my new family. When I confronted her about it, she tried to laugh it off as a joke, but something didn't feel right. Eventually, I started piecing everything together. I found out that years ago, my brother's girlfriend had been briefly pregnant before they broke up. After telling my mom in person, she suddenly wasn't pregnant anymore, and that's when they split. The implication is horrifying. My mom may have caused my brother's girlfriend to miscarry, possibly intentionally. It also explains why my brother cut off contact and why he was so adamant about warning me. It dawned on me that my mom might have been planning to do the same thing with my girlfriend. Learning this shattered my perception of my mom. I realized that my brother had been protecting me by distancing himself and warning me. It's terrifying to think that someone who should be supportive could instead be such a threat. Story 27. My grandfather started dating my grandmother when he was 20, and she was just 13. Within a few months of their first date, my grandmother got pregnant. However, her family kept the pregnancy a secret from my grandfather. One day when he came to pick her up for a date, they informed him that she had been sent to live with cousins far away. My grandfather didn't put two and two together and got angry at her for not telling him she was leaving. In his frustration, he decided not to bother contacting her. Unbeknownst to him, one of her cousins adopted the baby. About a year later, my grandfather joined the army and was stationed outside the continental U.S. during World War II. Meanwhile, my grandmother moved back home with her parents and started writing letters to him. Eventually, they got back together, and as soon as the war ended, they got married. By that time, my grandmother was 17, and my grandfather was 24. They went on to have 2 daughters. As far as I can tell, my grandfather never knew about that first baby. My grandmother passed away in 1996, but my grandfather lived to be 92, and he never gave any hint that he knew what had actually happened. I seemed to be the only person in the family who figured out the truth. At one point, I tried to tell my mom about it, but she refused to listen. She didn't want to acknowledge that her parents might have had a more complicated past than the perfect image she held of them. Story 28. This story is about my husband's grandfather, whom both he and our son are named after. The official family story is that he died when a drunk driver hit him, and that's why my husband's grandmother was always so bitter. Everyone kept up the image of what a wonderful father and person he was, and even his grandmother, who had kicked him out the day she found out about his affair, never spoke ill of him to her grandchildren. However, I've pieced together a more complicated version of the truth from family, friends, and acquaintances in our small town. It turns out that he was visiting his mistress the night he was killed. His death may have saved my husband's grandmother from a divorce, as she ended up keeping everything: the house, the property, and the business his parents had started. Even after he was gone, his grandmother remained bitter and miserable. I'm not sure if it was from heartbreak or the lack of closure, but it seemed to weigh on her for the rest of her life. The most surprising part was how the whole family maintained the illusion of him being an amazing person, even though most people in town knew the truth. I had suspected something was off since about 2 years into my relationship with my husband, but I didn't feel it was my place to bring it up. Plus, the man had died a decade before my husband was born, so I figured it didn't really matter to our lives. Ironically, the truth only came out after my husband's mother had a string of affairs herself. In an attempt to make herself look better, she let it slip to my brother-in-law. It's incredibly sad because the whole family is so obsessed with maintaining a good image, but they're genuinely unhappy and wonder why we distanced ourselves from the drama and lies. I can't help but think that if the family had just been honest about the past from the start, age-appropriate and truthful, it would have saved my husband a lot of confusion and disappointment. Instead, he grew up with a false image that eventually shattered, leaving him feeling hurt and betrayed. It's a stark reminder that trying to preserve a perfect family illusion can end up doing more harm than good. Story 29. I'm a junior, meaning I have the exact same 3 names as my dad. One day, way back when Googling yourself was just becoming popular, long before MySpace was even a thing, my buddy called me up. He had been bored and decided to look up everyone in our friend group online. He told me he found something strange, a website that said, "The disgraceous junior father looking for." Apparently, it turned out that my dad had a child with a woman who was working as a lady of the evening while he was in the Navy. My dad had no idea. To make things more awkward, she was only a few days younger than my oldest sister. At the time, my dad wasn't in a good place. He had just gone through a divorce and wasn't in the right frame of mind to reach out. A little while later, I got a message on MySpace from an international family finding service. I just forwarded the message to him. A few years passed, and by that time, my dad had remarried and was in a more stable place. Eventually, he did reach out. They've met a few times. They talk regularly and keep in touch despite the long distance. She's a nurse and has a daughter, and from what I gather, they have a pretty decent relationship now. It's not really a dark secret, but more of a surprising family twist that actually turned out well in the end. Sometimes life can throw unexpected surprises your way, and in this case, it led to something positive. A new family connection and a bit of closure. Story 30. Growing up, I always believed that my grandmother was one of 4 daughters born to my great-grandfather and great-grandmother. I never met my great-grandparents since they passed away 2 years before I was born. One day I was looking through the family Bible, which had everyone's names, marriage dates, death dates, and other details. Something caught my eye. A 5th daughter listed, one who was older than the others. Curious, I asked my grandmother about it, and she explained the story. Apparently, my great-grandfather had been married before he met my great-grandmother. He married his first wife when he was about 20 and had a daughter a year later. Unfortunately, his first wife cheated on him with a wealthy man, took their daughter, and left him to be with the rich guy. It broke his heart. 17 years later, the daughter came back and started living with my great-grandfather again. By that time, he was already married to my great-grandmother and had 2 children with her. The daughter didn't make things easy, though. She constantly complained about money, criticized everyone, and treated them like peasants because they didn't live up to her standards. Eventually, she left the house to marry another rich guy and was never seen or heard from again. I felt bad for my great-grandpa, losing both his wife and daughter just because they chased wealth. I have no idea if that great-aunt is still alive. She would be around 99 now. But it makes me wonder if I have long-lost cousins out there. While looking through the Bible, I also learned that my great-grandpa was technically a junior. He dropped the title because he despised his father, who had abandoned his family to be with his mistress and start another family. Years later, when my great-grandpa was in his 20s, his father tried to reconnect, flaunting his wealth. My great-grandpa, disgusted by the showboating and remembering the hardships he faced growing up, told him off and refused to ever see him again. It's strange how family history can hold so many unexpected and painful stories. All from one old family Bible, I discovered that my great-great-grandfather was a terrible father, and I had a long-lost great-aunt who left the family for riches. Story 31. My aunt on my dad's side recently found out that she had a different father from her siblings. There are 5 sisters and my dad. They all grew up thinking they had the same mom and dad, except for her. It turns out that she was adopted as a baby. Her biological mother had an affair with my grandpa, and when she got pregnant, my grandpa left the bio mom to be with my grandma. My grandma, wanting to raise the baby since she was the product of her husband, convinced the bio mom to sign over her rights. The bio mom agreed because, apparently, she didn't want the baby if she couldn't have my grandpa. My aunt didn't find out any of this until my grandma was on her deathbed. No one had ever talked about it before, and the revelation shocked her. But that's not the only surprise. My grandpa also had an affair with an older woman who ended up having a son. None of my aunts or my dad knew about this half-brother for 35 years. Eventually, they found out that the half-brother had already passed away, but he had a son. The twist? That son turned out to be my dad's boss. They only discovered their relation because of a DNA test through 23andMe. My cousin took the test and so did my dad's boss. When my cousin checked the people you're related to section, he saw my dad's boss listed. That's when they connected the dots. Now, my dad's boss is technically his nephew. It's a small world, and it's crazy how family secrets can unravel through something as simple as a DNA test. What started as a work relationship turned into a surprising family connection. Story 32. My college professor uncle always gave me an uneasy feeling. I never liked being alone with him, even though he was well liked by his students and peers. Some of his Rate My Professors reviews even mentioned that he was attractive, despite being a balding man in his 40s. One day I was chosen to deliver a birthday gift to him since I happened to be attending the same college where he taught. I knocked on his office door and he called out that it was unlocked, so I went in. Immediately I noticed how cold the room was. I couldn't stop shivering. My uncle was engrossed in something on his computer and barely acknowledged me. Then he gestured for me to come over to his desk, saying, "Come here and take a look at this." What I saw on his computer screen left me speechless. It was a list of questions. Dark family secrets, worst advice you've been given, job interview questions, dozens of common Reddit topics. My uncle looked at me with a sly grin and whispered, "Nobody knows this, but I post the exact same questions on Ask Reddit every single week and I get away with it. There's basically no moderation for these common questions, so it's easy karma farming. Then I just sell the account to an astroturfer and move on to the next one." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My heart raced and I knew I had to get out of there. I ran out of his office without looking back. I decided to be honest about what I had seen, even though I couldn't really prove it. Word spread around the college, and although nothing official came of it, people stopped trusting him. His reputation took a hit, and his classes that used to have long waiting lists were no longer full. I still hope one day he'll get caught red-handed and justice will be served. Story 33. I recently discovered that my wealthy grandfather was one of the earliest major donors to dark money schemes in the United States back in 1996. He worked alongside the Koch brothers and others to set up shell companies that funneled money into 26 senatorial races. His efforts, along with a few others, became the pilot cases for right-wing dark money schemes that would go on to pour billions into the political campaign finance machine. One notable example was his support for Senator Sam Brownback of Kansas, who would later be notorious for devastating the state's economy. My grandfather was one of Brownback's first donors and backroom supporters. To this day, no one else in my family knows about this except me, my grandfather, and one cousin I confided in. I confronted my grandfather once, hoping he would express some kind of regret or acknowledgement of the damage he helped cause. Instead, he just shrugged it off, acting like it was no big deal. He didn't even care about the $25,000 fine he had to pay the Federal Elections Committee. He couldn't see, or wouldn't admit, how his actions contributed to the chaotic political landscape and the disenfranchisement of those without his level of access and wealth. It's unsettling to think about how someone I've known my whole life played a role in shaping the political turmoil we see today, and how he remains so indifferent to the consequences of his actions. Story 34. Maybe not the darkest story, but my family's definitely messed up and I've got a few things to share. My dad's side of the family has always been strange. I'm the only one who's really done something with my life. When my parents got married, my maternal grandparents bought them a house. Not long after I was born, almost exactly 9 months later. When I was 5, my parents divorced. My paternal grandfather told my dad he should move back to California because he had nothing to keep him here. I never liked my grandfather. He's always been one of those people constantly trying to find some scam to make money. Despite his father's advice, my dad stayed in North Carolina. In 2020, after my dad's stepmother passed away from brain cancer, my grandfather moved out to North Carolina. My dad can't stand him, but tries to play nice. When he moved, my grandfather brought along my cousin from Utah. This cousin's mom, my aunt, died in 2007 when he was just 8. His dad is in prison, and he's been bouncing around, sleeping on friends' couches for the past 3 years. My other aunt and cousin also moved to North Carolina around the same time. So for a while, 5 people were crammed into my dad's 2-bedroom apartment. Eventually, my aunt, cousin, and grandfather moved out, leaving the cousin with my dad. He had no high school degree, no car, and just a part-time fast food job. My dad and him constantly butted heads, and 2 weeks ago, my dad kicked him out. Now he's moved in with a coworker. It makes me sick to see how easily my family gives up on each other. Growing up, my dad wasn't much better. He used to threaten to beat me almost daily. One time, he even pinned me against the wall with his hand around my neck. On my wife's side, it's also a mess. Her dad cheated, left her mom and two brothers, and married the woman he had the affair with. They have a son together, and just this week, we found out they're expecting another child. He just turned 57, and his wife is 36. That means my wife will have a half-sister 26 years younger than her, and our kids will have a half-aunt who is only a year or two older than them. Sometimes I can't help but wonder how families can be so complicated and fractured. Story 35. When I was about 10 or 12, I got curious about one of my aunts on my dad's side. I asked my mom if she had gotten a divorce because I knew she had adult kids I had never met, and her husband never showed up at family gatherings. Plus, my parents would always argue whenever she called, which made me more curious. That's when my mom told me the truth. My aunt had been married once, but she had a gambling addiction that spiraled out of control. She gambled away all their money and in desperation convinced her husband to embezzle money from his job to keep them afloat. One day he got caught, and rather than face the consequences, he took his own life. Even after that tragedy, my aunt didn't address her addiction. The family continued to give her money for years because she was now a widow. The reason I never saw my cousins is that they cut ties with her. They were furious that she didn't change after their father's death. My dad was the last one to stop giving her money. It only ended because my mom threatened to divorce him if he didn't prioritize their own young family and mortgage. Eventually, after everyone cut her off, my aunt moved a few hundred kilometers away from the casino and finally started dealing with her addiction. Nowadays, she's lived a relatively stable life for years and has reconnected with her kids and grandkids. Ironically, she's a pretty judgmental person, despite her past. I still feel sorry for her late husband, though. It's a shame he didn't just leave her rather than steal for her. Gambling addiction can destroy lives, and it's heartbreaking to see how it tore their family apart. At least she found a way to make things right in the end, but it came at a heavy cost. Story 36. When I was a teenager, my mom would often get drunk and start spilling family secrets. I'm not really sure why she did it, but I learned a lot of unexpected things during those late-night confessions. The first secret she revealed was that my older brother had a different dad than me, despite what his birth certificate said. That was later verified, and my brother eventually got to meet his biological father. About a year later, I started dating a boy from school. One day, my mom met his parents, and something about that encounter triggered a memory for her. That night, after getting drunk again, she told me that the boy's dad was also my oldest cousin's dad. That was a shock, considering my aunt and uncle had been together my entire life. Apparently, back when my aunt was young, she had been with this boy's dad. He was abusive, so when she got pregnant, she ran off and married my uncle instead. Ironically, my mom did something similar when she got pregnant with my older brother, running away and marrying someone else. I guess that was just how they handled things back then. I have a strong feeling that if someone did DNA tests in my family, a lot of secrets would come to light. One thing that's never been confirmed, but I suspect, is that my mom's dad might not be her biological father. Both her parents were blonde with blue eyes, and all 8 of her siblings were as well. My mom, on the other hand, has black hair and brown eyes. I guess my family has always had more hidden layers than I thought. Story 37. When I was a kid in the early 90s, my brother and I were told that our uncle and 2 baby cousins had died in a car crash. It was devastating because they were the closest family we had, and we looked forward to watching our cousins grow up. Fast forward to 2015, I'm married and had just bought our first house. One day I got curious about where my cousins were buried, so I started Googling their names. That's when I stumbled upon an article about a murder-suicide, specifically fratricide. Confused, I kept reading, and near the end, it listed my uncle and 2 cousins as an example. It turns out that my uncle hadn't died in a car crash. He was going through a divorce, and my aunt was going to take full custody of the kids. My uncle decided that if he couldn't have his kids, nobody could. So he smothered them with a pillow and then shot himself. My mom kept this secret from us for over 20 years. When I called to tell her I found out, I made sure to explain that I wasn't angry. I understood why she didn't tell us. Her parents had asked her to keep it quiet until they had passed. My brother and I agreed to stay silent to respect their wishes. My grandpa passed a few years ago, and my grandma is now in a nursing home. I've shared the truth with a few close friends, but it's tough to live with it quietly. It's a painful reality that completely changed my perception of what really happened. Story 38. This story isn't really dark, but it was a bit of a family secret. My oldest son isn't my biological child. He has a younger sister and a younger brother, both of whom are mine and my wife's. He knows who his biological father is, but the guy's a drug addict and hasn't been around at all. The younger sister kind of knew about it, but the youngest brother had no clue. We never intentionally hid it, we just never made a big deal about it. I legally adopted my oldest son when he was 10, and he took my last name like the rest of us. Fast forward to all three kids being in college at the same time. They are 5 years apart from oldest to youngest. The oldest son's girlfriend knew about his birth father and decided to tell a girl in class. That girl happened to be seeing my youngest son, so she immediately went to him and dropped the bombshell that he and his brother weren't really brothers. My youngest was shocked and confused, so I drove down to see him right away to make sure he was okay. When I got there, he looked at me and asked, "Am I adopted?" Mind you, he's named after me, looks just like me, and yet his first thought was that he was the adopted one. After I straightened it all out, he just shrugged and said, "I don't care. He's still my brother, no matter what." That was honestly one of the most heartwarming things I've ever heard. Despite the confusion, they are as close as brothers can be, and that bond hasn't changed one bit. Story 39. This story is a bit complicated, so bear with me. I was adopted at a young age by a family that turned out to be severely abusive toward me. I endured that hell until I was rescued around the age of 12. During that time, I had 3 brothers, 2 older and 1 younger. About 10 years ago, the middle brother actually apologized to me for all the trauma and abuse he witnessed me go through. It was unexpected but somewhat healing. However, the oldest and youngest brothers never said a word to me about it. I've made my peace with how terrible that family line is, but their silence still lingers in the back of my mind. Yesterday, I decided to look up the oldest brother. I like to keep tabs on them just to make sure they aren't living too close to me. That's when I stumbled upon a massive news article from another state. The headline hit me like a punch to the gut. The oldest brother had abused 2 of his supposed 7 kids in the same horrific way I was abused for nearly 12 years. I was overwhelmed with fury and heartbreak for those poor girls. I couldn't believe that after everything I had gone through, he went on to inflict the same pain on his own children. I was also furious at their mother for standing by and doing nothing. Part of me wanted to drive straight to him and punch him in the throat until he couldn't move anymore. The article mentioned that all of this happened in 2018 and that the trial took place in 2020. I haven't had the chance to look up what came of it, but the rage inside me hasn't stopped boiling since I found out. It's soul-crushing to know that the cycle of abuse didn't end with me. After surviving it myself, the thought that his own kids went through the same hell makes me feel sick.